Welcome to Stay Curious, everybody. I'm Mark Marquette. So glad you've joined us today to Stay Curious with a special guest, Bob Granath, beside me. Hi, Bob.
Hi, hi, Mark.
How you doing? I'm going to move the microphone over here
All right, sounds
and
good.
to get you over there as we're looking
All right.
forward to Bob having another great history lesson with us today about the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. So Bob's got a great script prepared here, but I'm sure he'll take time to answer your questions. Let me push my
Oh yeah.
automatic laptop here, smart tablet there to see what's going on. Live chat, there we go, is up there. So we're looking for y'all to say hi to us on a Thursday, July 17th, 2025. And we always enjoy having Bob here. You do a great job. And we even reprised one of your episodes on the Kennedy
Oh,
Space
good.
Center that got a lot of play. So, but your
Good.
Leonovs really surprised us. In fact, talking about Alexei Leonov's spacewalk a month ago is one of our highest rated shows in a couple months,
Well,
Bob.
sounds good.
What do you think that's the cause of that? People's interest in
Well,
spacewalking
I think so.
or
I mean, and Leonov was just a fascinating individual to begin with, and
yeah.
so we talk about him with the Apollo Soyuz Test Project today.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with how well you relay information to the public, and you've done that for over 35 years, right? When your
Oh yeah.
career before you retired.
Well, that's it. It's fun talking about what we've done in the exploration of space and all the history that's involved, and so I really enjoy getting out and talking about it.
Yes, as we do here on Stay Curious, and we're glad that you spend your time. And I'm looking forward to a good program today on, I'm not going to say it's a little known, but certainly less observed mission in the American space program that we're going to build this weekend as Peace in Earth Orbit, as
Yeah.
we have an afternoon with Steve Agne's going to do a retrospective of that. Steve is also a frequent contributor to Stay Curious. He's a educator out there at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. And then at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a panel discussion with Jay Honeycutt, former Kennedy Space Center director, but he was a Johnson Space Center simulations manager
Right.
back then, throwing the monkey wrench at
Yeah.
the Apollo crew of things that could go wrong that they might have to train for. And John Tribe, British John Tribe, what a wonderful gentleman he is. He was a Rockwell hypergolics expert. And I don't know if you're going to address it, so I won't do a spoiler, but the reentry of the Apollo Soyuz 3 astronauts was less than nominal. And
That's true.
John will be talking about that. So
Yeah.
hope that you can join us in person. We do have limited seating in our small conference room, but we're going to broadcast it live on YouTube starting at about 1 o'clock with Steve's program. So hope you can join us then. Marty, I'm not seeing any comments from anybody. Are we okay over there?
Yeah, we're getting comments.
Oh, okay. Hey, once again, I'm seeing a live chat. Oh, there we are. Okay. Well, we got Robert Laws up in Dundee, Scotland. He said he was 15 when he watched the Apollo
Oh,
Soyuz
okay.
mission in 1975. And Carlton Bailey's there from his animal compound at Canaveral Groves. He says it's stormy over there.
Ah,
It's not
okay.
here in Titusville yet,
No, not yet.
but he's south of us. And Dave Stange says Bob's shows are highly rated, and that's why we enjoy listening to him. And sometimes you too, Mark, he said. He didn't put sometimes in there. Thank you. And Mitch Rothman, did you get a chance? You got a chance to meet Mitch
Did.
over at Shuttle Fest, didn't you?
I did.
Yep. And he's just like you and me, wanting to promote space out there.
Oh,
So,
you bet.
Mitch, good to see you. And Steve Jokums. Hello, Steve. We're glad that you're on board with our family here. Depot MSA is complimenting us with a great show. We appreciate that. Marty Winkle, my co-producer, uh, I don't think you had much to do with the Apollo Soyuz Test Project, did you?
Nothing at all.
But you got your walk-in papers in 1972 from Grumman with the lunar module. And then what did you do? Did you go directly to the shuttle, or did you
I went to school to get my engineering degree.
Okay. What school did you go to?
Well, I wound up graduate. I went to Brevard Community College and went to back then it was called FTU, Florida Technical University, which was UCF eventually. And then I moved up to Jacksonville and went to University of North Florida. And then I went temporarily to Charleston, South Carolina. Went to College of Charleston. And then
Mhm.
finally graduated from University of North Florida. So that's what I did.
Well, I'm glad you got an engineering degree, Marty. Bob, after all, for 5 years he worked for Grumman building the one and only spacecraft to operate in outer space and land
Right.
on the moon and blast off the moon.
Yeah.
That was all he did beforehand. So I'm certainly glad he went and finally got an engineering degree there.
Yeah.
Of course,
Was
he was
doing
an
pretty good
electric. You were an
before.
electrical engineer there in that. But that's the way it was in the Apollo era. Was
Right.
there was no engineering school to go to learn how to build a lunar module, right, Marty? You guys did it literally on the fly with a lot of great engineers, right?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Well, we got to give a little bit of love to the Apollo 11 going to the
Yes.
moon 56 years ago right now. If you want to
Mhm.
watch it live, so to speak, go to Apollo 11 real time, and it matches every transcript, every photograph with what's happening on the timeline, Bob. It's really fun to
Yeah.
watch. Have you ever done that?
I haven't done that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that at the beginning here, but you can't talk about the moon landing without President John F. Kennedy and his
Exactly.
great speech challenging us to go to the moon. I say it'll be played 1,000 years from now.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. It's such an inspiring thing, and really, really kicked us off and get us going on the road to the moon.
What do you think about the moon 56 years later? You were a teenager like myself, but I think we're
Yeah.
about the
Well,
same
let's
age.
see. 1969, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, I was 28 years old. Or no, excuse me, wasn't that old.
Oh,
I was
didn't say-
69. I was 18 years old.
Okay, you're
18
just a
years
couple
old.
years ahead of
Yeah,
me.
I was in my freshman year in college and watched a lot of it there and some of it home. President Nixon asked people in schools to give people the day off so you could stay up late on July the 20th, 1969, so they could watch it, and that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, it was a Sunday afternoon, and it's replaying the 20th on a Sunday afternoon. So
Yeah.
having a day off, I'm going to be glued to it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you can actually hear them live, the transmission about 4:30 Eastern Standard Times when they landed, then the moonwalk around 10:30. Yeah, I'll never forget it myself.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
those grainy pictures of Neil coming down the ladder there.
Oh, yeah.
It was just I couldn't believe we were actually doing it after being eat up with it for so long. Well, I gave a shout out yesterday, an email, and I meant to rack up the slide, but I brought one with me here to you. With who you were there with, Bob?
Yeah, that's Joanne Morgan. And
what did she do 56 years ago?
when Apollo 11 launched, she was in the firing room working some of the communications loops. And as such, she was the only woman engineer in the firing room at the Kennedy Space Center when Apollo 11 lifted off. But she served in a lot of roles at the Kennedy Space Center, including heading up the Safety, Quality, and Mission Assurance Office, and later leading external relations. But she was an important leader in the very long history of the Kennedy Space Center.
And that's you and her,
Right.
a couple months ago.
Yeah, that was right back
Back
here.
in April, I think, when she
Yeah.
was here, taking her to dinner, I believe. She was our featured speaker on our fundraising Friday Shuttle Fest. And I wanted to I emailed her and let her know that we were thinking about her. And we will always, that's what our museum's about, is space workers like her,
Yeah,
Bob.
that's
To keep
exactly
her
right.
legacy alive there. And she said, "Thanks, Mark. Yes, I'm enjoying the Northern Rockies." She's in Montana. "And my cherry trees are loaded with fruit and good prospects for viewing meteor showers tonight here in Montana." And then she said, "It was an honor to be part of the Apollo 11 launch team. We got to make history for everyone on our planet." Joanne Morgan. Thank you, dear Joanne, for, and I'm happy to share those thoughts and words from a great lady.
And
She
you
made no
mentioned,
bounds that she's 85 years old.
oh yeah, you wouldn't tell.
And she grew up in Titusville. She
Yeah.
spends the winters here, and then she's in Montana the rest of the time there. So, yes, you were saying something.
Well, one of the things that Mike Collins, the command module pilot on that flight, liked to talk about is they traveled around the world after that mission. A lot of the people, no matter where they were in the world, said, "We did it," meaning the people of planet Earth did it. They didn't say, "You Americans did it." We as people on planet Earth did it. And he really appreciated that everybody, as they traveled, felt like they were a part of that achievement, that it wasn't just something we Americans did.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why Neil, Mike, and Buzz decided to leave their names off the mission patch. It simply shows Apollo 11 and the Eagle landing on the moon with the Earth in the background. And that was intentional to say, this isn't just 3 astronauts or one country or one group of people. It's the entire world going out to a new world. And I think what Mike Collins says about that is really indicative of the fact that people around the world felt like we, all of us, the citizens of planet Earth, did that.
Well said, Bob. Well said. By everybody's sentiments that grew up with this, it was such a I want to say sort of a surreal world with racing Russia to the moon. All
Oh,
right,
yeah.
a real space race. Russia would have loved to have been first, right?
Oh, yeah, they were certainly trying.
And that would have proven that communism is better than our democracy. Was how the bottom line, because you know they
That's
were
how
very
they looked at it.
yeah, everything was very propaganda oriented, wasn't it, Bob?
That's it.
Them. So, but then just 6 years after the first moon landing and beating the pants off of Russia to the moon, I always like to say, Bob, we not only went and fulfilled President Kennedy's pledge before the end of the decade, we doubled down in November with Apollo 12.
That's right.
And
We
did it
it twice
again.
before
And
the
did
end
it
of the
twice.
decade.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And that's the American way, baby. Okay. But 6 years later, this is an illustration, a beautiful one, of the Russian Soyuz spacecraft with 2 cosmonauts on it, and the American last command module and service module that would have been Apollo 20, quite possibly, with a docking module, very special, to dock
That's right.
2 foreign spacecraft together. And to tell that story, that's why we have Bob here. We wanted to just mention, but Bob has a website, spacechronicle.com, and I'm sure you've got several Apollo 11 stories on there.
Oh, there are. And just a couple of days ago, I posted one on the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. And some of the things I learned putting that story together is what I wanted to talk about today.
All right.
And this is a good transition because in landing on the moon, we were in a race with the Russians. We were adversaries going along on separate paths. We got there first. But again, spaceflight is often a lot about politics. And that's what happened with the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. It was one of those things that would not have been thinkable just a few years before. The idea of Russians and Americans flying together and exchanging between their 2 spacecraft.
Yeah, unthinkable to even think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Would have been un-American, quite frankly,
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
it?
Yeah, well, it started out when the NASA administrator, Thomas Paine, in 1970, sent a letter to the head of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Mstyslav Kestelov, suggesting a joint effort. And it really didn't seem likely because around 1970, 1971, we were well into the Apollo moon landing effort. The Russians had just started their space station program, the first Salyut mission, but it too did not go very well because they had 3 cosmonauts spent about 24 days on Salyut 1, and due to a pressure failure in the spacecraft as they returned to Earth on their Soyuz, those 3 cosmonauts died. And so the Russians were open to a mission with us because they were sitting back and kind of looking at where things are. The fact of the matter is there is a one of the important people in the Russian space program was named Boris Chertov. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, he worked with the National History Division and wrote a book, or actually a series of books. And the last volume was titled The Moon Race, a part of his series of Rockets and People. And he explained why the Soviet Union was interested in this Apollo Soyuz mission. Up to that point, they had held everything real close, everything was secret. There was a lot they didn't talk about, a lot we didn't know. But by this point, the Soviet people were beginning to learn the Americans beat us to the moon. For a long time, all they heard was all the different successes and achievements of the Russian program, and we were hopelessly behind. And then once we landed on the moon with Apollo 11, as we were just discussing, in Pravda, there was a small article buried deep inside that the American astronauts had landed and walked on the moon. So
like a sidebar story, huh?
That was it. And so the Soviet people knew we'd beaten them to the moon. And they couldn't understand it because they had only been told things that we were hopelessly behind. And at this point, the world knew that the Russians were behind us. And they were looking for a way to kind of pull themselves up equal to us again, especially after the failure on Salyut 1. And so by doing something that would bring them up parallel with us, where one of their spacecraft docks with ours, they had to pay a price. And that price is they had to open their space program. They had to allow a lot of American space experts into their training facilities, into their mission control, to their launch site at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. And so they were paying a price to do the joint mission, but what they got in return is the appearance that they were up there equal with us. The other thing that I've found fascinating is the more of I've looked at Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov, who were the two commanders, as these two people, by the time we flew this, Tom Stafford was a lieutenant general in the U.S. Air Force. Alexei Leonov was a major general in the Soviet Air Force. They spent the first half of their careers learning how to kill the other guy.
Yes, exactly.
And so they start working
Enemies.
together on Apollo Soyuz, and they find out they're a lot alike. They became very close friends.
They
And
certainly
in fact,
did. They very close friends.
As it turned out, Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov became tight friends. Stafford would go over to Russia. Leonov would come over and visit here. There was one point where Stafford said, "Oh yeah, I had Alexei Leonov over here. We went swimming and surfing and went snorkeling and all this." And they became such tight friends that later on, Tom Stafford said, "Alexei's like a brother to me." And it shows that when you get down to people who have a common interest, it doesn't matter that you have a Soviet program and an American program. When you find out what the other guys are like, you find out he's really a lot like us.
Yeah. Let me interject there just if you've not been to the Tom Stafford Museum in his hometown of Weatherford, Oklahoma, you need to do that. And we're talking about maybe doing a road trip this winter there. But a lot of Russian stuff there you're not going to see anywhere else, including a bunch of Russian crew and American crew signed vodka bottles. There's a huge display over there, all the liquor bottles, and they sign them. The weapon that's under the Soyuz spacecraft as we speak, the combination shotgun, pistol, and machete, the TS-22, I think it's called. And what I wanted to interject was, yes, they were such great friends that Leonov said he spoke Oklahomsky, is what he said. He spoke Oklahomsky accent, and because he learned his English from an Oklahoman, Tom Stafford, basically.
Right.
And when Leonov died about 4 years ago, the general gave his eulogy at Red Square in Russian. And one of the 2 or 3 eulogy people up there. So that was just awesome. And then Tom's passed away about 1.5 years ago. It was a year in March, I believe.
That's
in
right.
there at age 92 or something like that. But
Yeah.
you're going to tell, I just wanted to interject this. You see a lot of the Russian in the camaraderie, and they have a docking module there and stuff like that
Oh yeah.
at the Tom Stafford Air and Space Museum, about 50 miles on I-40 west of Oklahoma City. Got to have that on
Yeah.
your bucket list. You
Oh
and your
yeah.
wife need to take that trip
That
there.
is on my list.
That's
But
probably all I'll add, but I wanted to
oh,
add that because
that's
uh,
good. It really makes the point of what happened with Apollo Soyuz.
and Marty's got a question from one of our intelligent viewers.
I got a question from Jim McDade. The USA paid all of the cost of the ASCP docking module, and it was 100% made in USA. Is that right?
All of it except the Russian docking mechanism. The Russians built that, sent it over to the United States, and we attached it to the docking module itself. The rest of the module was built here in the United States.
Good question, Jim
Yeah.
McDade. Thank you for joining our social gathering here today on Stay Curious. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles, and Dave Stange says that The Two Sides of the Moon was written by David Scott and Alexei Leonov, is a great read, and
Oh, it is an
certainly
excellent book.
Yes, it is an excellent book, and
Yeah.
yes, if you haven't read that, find it and read it there. So keep going there, Bob, and tell me when to
All right.
advance the slides. there,
Okay.
buddy.
Yeah, go ahead and advance. Get on to the next one.
Talking with Bob Granath here. You see the companies he worked for, and that's his website where he has all kinds of other stories, and we're very privileged to have him part of Stay Curious here the past 9 months or so. But yeah, what an awesome, of course, no spacecraft took that. That's an artist rendering of what it would have looked like.
Yeah, it's sort of a composite photo. This is a picture that I took of Alexei Leonov and
You
Tom
took that.
Stafford
All right.
when they were speaking to a luncheon of the National Space Club Florida Committee back in 1990 on one of the anniversary of Apollo Soyuz. And I have that there just to show that these two guys were in separate air forces, but they ultimately became very close friends. And then if you go on to the next one, when all of this was being planned, the United States was well into our Apollo program. The Russians had just started their Salyut space station program. And then you go on to the next one, and what you see is President Nixon and Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin signing the agreement that was called a cooperation in the fields of science and technology. And that's the event that, or the agreement that committed both countries to the Apollo Soyuz Test Project.
I see Brezhnev in the background.
Oh yeah,
there with the
he's
big
overlooking
eyebrows.
everything, and
And I don't recognize any of the other American delegation there. Do you?
there's a guy leaning over, blotting the signature of Nixon. Right behind him is William Rogers, who was the American Secretary of State at the time.
And the Rogers Commission of the
That's right.
of Challenger right above there.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Marty, go ahead.
Got a question from Dave Stange. Wasn't there an interesting story about the docking probe design of the Russian side of the adapter module?
Yeah, the one they used on Apollo Soyuz was different from the one they had been using to dock between two Soyuz spacecraft or the Soyuz and the Salyut space station. They were looking for something to develop a sort of an international docking mechanism so that if you eventually get to the point where everybody uses the same docking mechanism, then if there is a rescue where one nation could save astronauts from another, it'd make it easier for them to dock together. So the docking mechanism that the Russians developed for this is different from any they had used previously.
And great explanation also, Gary Allgaier, who we've not been able to, we're trying to solve our technical problem to bring in people remotely, but Gary Allgaier, you know him, popular. Also, his programs, he's out of the state right now, and he's anxious to talk about the Apollo Soyuz docking mechanisms on another program, and we'll try to maybe effort that from him next week. But good question, thank you.
Now, this particular picture is a photograph of Boris Chertov with Alexei Leonov. The picture was actually taken in 2009, but Chertoff is the one who wrote that book, Rockets and People, The Moon Race. And one of the things he said that is our people had grown accustomed to the cascade of achievements of our cosmonautics. The Americans' brilliant success of landing men on the moon was a complete surprise to the Russian people. During the Cold War, the Soviet mass media made no mention of America's human lunar program. All of this was strictly classified. And so that's why it was such a surprise when the Russian people started finding out that we'd beaten them to the moon. And in fact, one of the things Leonov pointed out in that book, Two Sides of the Moon, that he wrote with David Scott, he said, this Apollo Soyuz was the first launch of any space mission broadcast live on television in the Soviet Union. And so we'd always been broadcasting our launches live, and it showed our successes. It also took the chance of showing a failure if it happened. But we decided we wanted to do our program out in the open. And so with Apollo Soyuz, they put their launch on television. A few hours later, we got to see their launch as well. But one of the things Chertok pointed out in his book is their defense minister, a guy named Dmitry Ustinov, then spoke to Valentin Glushko, who was the manager of their space program. And he said, okay, I request that you personally take over supervision of this Apollo Soyuz Test Project. This work must be performed brilliantly. The Americans are going to study our work intensely and literally examine it if it was under a microscope. You must keep a firm hold on our technical and ideological positions. So, as I said earlier, they knew their program was going to be under a microscope, and we'd be seeing things that never released before, but their payoff is they got to see their spacecraft and our spacecraft docking together, sort of making them look equal to us. Now, if you go on to the next photo, this was the concern of the Americans. This is the Soviet Soyuz on this mission. And there were some Americans who didn't exactly have a high opinion of the Soviet Soyuz. Dr. Chris Kraft, who had been a flight director for a long time, by this time he was director of the Johnson Space Center. What he said at the time is, we in NASA rely on redundant components. If an instrument fails during flight, our crews simply switch to another and attempt to continue the mission. Each Soyuz component, however, is designed for a specific function. If it fails, the cosmonauts simply land as soon as possible. The Apollo vehicle also relied on astronaut piloting to a greater extent than did the Russian Soyuz. And that's one of the differences between our spacecraft and their spacecraft. A lot of their spacecraft were primarily automatic systems. Ours relied on the piloting of the astronauts. But one of the things that Glenn Lunny, another one of the flight directors who became the manager of the Apollo Soyuz Test Project in the United States, he warned American astronauts against expressing any dissatisfaction with the Russian spacecraft. Criticism might result in the Soviets withdrawing from the project. So said, you'll see it, but live with it. So then the next challenge that came was developing a way to have two spacecraft with totally different docking mechanisms find a way to link up in space. And what you see here is an artist rendering of the Apollo after launch, separating and turning around and hooking up with the docking module that was in the top of the second stage of the Saturn 1B launch vehicle. And then in the next slide, you see what the docking module looked like as the interface between the two spacecraft.
Actually, another room also.
Yeah, it created an additional room. The Apollo had the command module. You had the docking module that was room. Then the sort of oval-shaped module there that has CCCP on the side. That's the orbital module of the Soyuz. And then the conical part to the left of that, yeah, right there. That's the launch and reentry module where the astronauts go up and return. And of course, this is a spacecraft the Soviets began using in 1967, and they still use the Soyuz to this day.
And that's interesting. They launched, of course, you have the trunk on the back with the avionics and fuel and stuff like that, solar panel power. But yeah, they're actually launched in the middle module, and the bulbous section is like an extra room,
That's
and,
right.
and a science room and so forth, which, though they had not as many redundant systems like you point out, they built a roomier spacecraft.
Mhm.
And when we talk to astronauts who've been in Bacanor and Star City and other people there, uh, they make it heavy duty. It's
Right.
it's built to last, and that's why there's not many redundancies. Is they spent money on the extra weight to take to
Yes.
space to have more uh, rigid objects, components is what I mean. Is
Yeah. Well, that's it. A lot of the Americans, after going over to Russia and seeing this, they build their capsules and rockets in a factory. We build our rockets and spacecraft in a clean room.
Yeah.
And it's because everything has to be so precise. And so it's just, again, one of the differences that we learn between our two programs. So who do you get to fly this? Well, this is the two crews together. And if you look real close, you'll see the mission patch. The Americans are wearing the patch to say Apollo Soyuz. The two Russians are reading it, so it reads Soyuz Apollo. And if you go to Russia, they'll talk about the Soyuz Apollo Test Project.
Yeah, I should have threw a patch in there and done
Yeah.
the history of it, and we'll do that tomorrow. But yes, you notice, look at Vance Brand here in the
Yeah.
middle and Kubasov on the other side. Vance's patch is blue on the left and Kubasov's is red on the left there.
Yeah. But
And
at any rate, Stafford was the American commander. He had previously flown on Gemini 6, Gemini 9, and Apollo 10. On Apollo 10 with Gene Cernan, they flew the lunar module to within 9 miles of the surface, sort of paving the way for Neil Armstrong and his crew on Apollo 11. And if you get on to the next slide, one of the things that happened with Stafford is the mission was flown in July of 75. A month before, he was offered the job as being the commander of the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base in California. He moved into that job after the Apollo Soyuz mission, and he moved into the job in November of 1975. And one of the jobs he had was leading the testing of this vehicle, the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, the first operational stealth fighter aircraft. And so he was in charge of testing of all of that.
indeed, he's considered the father of stealth technology.
That's right.
You might not
Because
know that, but that's
it
true.
all originated
And
in his leadership.
He passed up a moon landing, knowing that he would probably get that too.
Yep, yep.
But very, very smart man. What a guy.
And
Great
of course,
supporter of the museum too, by the way.
Oh,
He
yeah.
supported the museum fundraising efforts in the early days of Spaceview Park.
and of course, Alexei Leonov, the Russian commander, was known as the first person to walk in space that we talked about a little in the past. The next picture coming up is Deke Slayton during his Mercury days. He was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts selected in 1969, and he was training for the second orbital flight after John Glenn's mission. And doctors found that he had a slightly erratic heart rate and sort of deciding to steer on the side of caution. He was grounded, and after some procedures, he was able to return to flight status and was immediately assigned to be on board for the Apollo Soyuz mission. Of course, the other American on board.
I want to make sure, going back to Leonov.
Yeah.
Watch Bob's program on Alexei Leonov's spacewalk that you did a couple weeks ago or last month, and just on YouTube. It's really a good one and very popular and something that both of you and me lived through.
Oh yeah.
Very interesting. I love the watch that Deke's got on his left hand there.
Oh yeah.
Now, also, Deke Slayton is missing his ring finger on his left hand. All right. We showed that just recently as a week ago or so out of Spaceview Park, that you don't need that digit at all, this finger. But in that left hand of his, he don't have a ring finger in there. Did you know that?
All right, and this is Vance Brand, who was a naval aviator and Marine Corps. As a civilian flight test engineer, he tested the Navy's P-3 Orion anti-submarine warfare aircraft. But then he returned to military test piloting and was selected as one of 19 NASA astronauts selected in 1966. And of course, after Apollo Soyuz, he went on to command 3 space shuttle missions.
He's 94 years old, and Doug Forrest watching today. Saw him a couple weekends ago and talked to him up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or Lancaster, California area up there, and said he's got a good mind, but his 94-year-old body says he's not going out and travel and doing any more talking. So thanks for that update, Doug Forrest. And Doug did some artwork we hope to see of Vance.
Okay. And of course, the final crew member was Valery Kubasov, who started out with one of the design bureaus, and he helped design the Voskhod spacecraft, was essentially modifying a Vostok so it could handle 2 or 3 people. And so before flying on Apollo Soyuz, he had been selected as one of the first civilian cosmonauts in 1966. And he had a 5-day mission, Soyuz 6, in October of 69, and then went on to fly Soyuz 36 in 1980. And one of the things that, as the cosmonauts and astronauts were beginning to work together, one of the things they decided is during the mission, the Americans would speak Russian, the Russians would speak English, and Leonov says that was a symbolic gesture, but it also was important psychologically, as we had to understand our partners in space and what they were thinking. So as they went along, as they got close to the time for the launch, in fact, the night before, Tom Stafford telephoned Leonov from Kennedy to Baikonur, and he asked Leonov, well, how are things going? And Leonov's answer was, everything is going as smoothly as a peeled egg. How about you? And so Stafford's response was, as smoothly as 3 peeled eggs. See you in space. And so then the next day, another one of the challenges was, you're talking about coordinating 2 launches 10,000 miles apart and 7.5 hours one after the other. And so you go on to the next one, you see the Soyuz launch taking off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And
it launched first, huh?
Yeah, they launched first at 8:20 a.m. our time. Where they were, or in Moscow, it was 3:20 p.m. in the afternoon, but it was still the morning as the Soyuz lifted off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And then 7.5 hours later, at 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time, Saturn 1B launched with the 3 American astronauts from the Kennedy Space Center, launch pad 39B, and they headed to orbit. And shortly after the Americans got to orbit, Vance Brand radioed their counterparts, "We are in orbit." And one of the things Leonov said, it was an exhilarating feeling immediately to know that they're in space, the Americans are in space, and they're headed to a rendezvous. Well, one of the real cool areas of cooperation that came out of this is the people with the United States Postal Service decided it might be fun to have a joint stamp issue between the 2 countries. And so what they decided is they would have a Russian stamp artist design the stamp you see as the 2 spacecraft are approaching each other. Then an American stamp artist, Robert McCall, designed one that shows them docked. And so each nation issued both the stamps. The only difference between the Russians will be written in Russian and the Americans in English. The American stamps are worth 10 cents a piece at the time, and the Russians were sold for 12 kopecks. And so they issued them on the day of the 2 launches. And the first day of issue, the envelope you see there on the left was canceled in Moscow. And the one on the right, the first day of issue, was the Kennedy Space Center where the Apollo lifted off. So after 2 days in orbit, they began to approach. This is the Apollo as seen from the Russian spacecraft with the docking module attached. As they began to approach, Leonov said, as our orbits took both vehicles high over the European continent, I suddenly caught sight of the American spacecraft's beacon. It looked like a bright star. The maneuvers that followed, bringing our vehicles together closer and closer, seemed like the choreography between a graceful celestial ballet. And one of the things that you'll find when you read that book between Dave Scott and Alexei Leonov is Leonov is a very well-spoken individual, and a lot of the things that he says are just wonderful the way he words it. And so he's comparing this rendezvous to a celestial ballet. What Stafford said at this point is we had worked on this rendezvous very hard for 2.5 years. And I remember when flying the Apollo, we came up for the rendezvous and docking. Everything went great. So all that work in advance was paying off. And you get over to the next slide, you get a view of what the two spacecraft look like docked together. And this, of course, is an artist rendering with a cutaway, where you can see, starting on the left, you have Vance Brand in the American command module. You have Stafford and Slayton in the docking module, with Stafford reaching over to shake hands with Leonov in the orbital module of the Soyuz, and with Leonov is Kabasov in the orbital module. And of course, beyond that, you see the two empty seats of the Soyuz reentry module. And then on the next one became the big moment. Stafford said, with my fluent Russian and my slight Oklahoma accent, I said hello to Alexei, and they both had big smiles on their faces. Leonov's response was, my biggest impression was that when the hatch opened, we saw the face of Tom Stafford. It was a very big moment, not only in this flight, but very much for my and Valerie's lives. Leonov said it was just one of the high points of his life, being able to be a part of this, reaching across the threshold between an American and a Russian spacecraft, with the two cosmonaut and an astronaut shaking hands in Earth orbit. And this is really what it was about at this point, as a chance to bring our programs together. We learned a lot about what they were doing. They had a chance to learn a lot about what we were doing. And it was an opportunity to sort of bring the two programs together. And if not really equal, certainly in the eyes of the world, saw the two nations who had been adversaries for long working together in a peaceful manner. And it leads to just the topic you were talking about, peace in orbit. And that was a lot about it, what it was like. Leonov said, my biggest impression was just how wonderful it was to see the other guys. Shortly after the docking, the leaders of the two countries became involved. General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev called up the crews and said, the whole world is watching with rapt attention and admiration for your joint activities. Détente and positive changes in Soviet-American relations have made possible the first international spaceflight. Then President Gerald Ford called up, and as he talked to him, he said, as the world's oldest space rookie, addressing Deke Slayton, do you have any advice for any young people to hope to fly on a future space mission? To which Deke Slayton said, decide what you want to do and then never to give up until you've done it. And I think that's special for Slayton, because he had wanted to be an astronaut. He became an astronaut, was trained to be an astronaut, was grounded, and he kept working at it until he had a chance to fly himself. And so it was a good example of doing exactly what he was suggesting to not only American young people, but young people around the world. Decide what you want to do and keep working until you get there.
Slayton, by the way, you have to interject, was the chief of the astronaut office.
That's right.
For many years, and he and Alan Shepard chose the crews of all the Apollo flights. Shepard put himself an Apollo 14 commander after getting his Meniere's ear thing fixed. Slayton never really got any extra medical treatment. A lot of people think he just put himself on there as the chief of the astronaut office. I'm
Yeah.
going to fly. This is my last chance to
Yeah.
fly.
Well, I think what it was is they got comfortable with his heart condition. He argued at the time, back in the Mercury program in 1962, that it wasn't really that much of a problem. They knew he had an occasional erratic heartbeat when he was selected as a Mercury astronaut. And what had happened is somebody, in a case of being overcautious, said to the administrator of NASA, James Webb, what would happen if he had some kind of cardiac event while in space on a Mercury flight where he's by himself? And they began to wonder, well, would people blame President Kennedy for this? And then they said, well, we don't want to put President Kennedy in a situation where he might get blamed for this. And so out of extreme caution, the leadership of NASA decided they would not fly him. And what happened years later is they got comfortable with it. We knew more about the effects of spaceflight, and they said, let's fly him anyway. And once they had that, he was ready to assign himself to a flight. And in fact, what I have read, when he went into Chris Kraft, the director of the Johnson Space Center, he said, all right, I'm assigning myself as commander. Kraft said, wait a minute. We have a lot of experienced astronauts. We may need to assign one of them as the commander, but we'll certainly put you on the crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Deke Slayton, quite a legendary Mercury astronaut, very involved with that bronze dicky that he wore a lot in the launch control rooms in there.
Yep.
There he is with Leonov and first space artist there.
Yeah, and in fact, just another example of the friendship between Leonov and Stafford, and the fact that Leonov was such an outstanding artist. He drew this sketch of Stafford and during the flight, and that was just an example of both his friendship and his artistic ability.
Absolutely. He actually, on his Voskhod 2 flight, made some sketches and on there to truly become the first space artist.
Well, after the Leonov and Basov landed in Kazakhstan on July the 21st, the Americans stayed up a few days longer, knowing that it was going to be a while before the first space shuttle flight. So they returned on July 24 and were recovered by the USS New Orleans helicopter carrier in the Pacific. But shortly after that, they came to the Kennedy Space Center and they had this news conference. And one of the things Stafford said in answer to a question, some of the proposals have been made of a Soviet cosmonaut flying aboard the space shuttle and to have an American astronaut launched on a Soyuz and go up to the Russian space station. And so indeed, when we got to 1991, some of that stuff began happening. In the fall of 1991,
Krikalev.
Sergei Krikalev became the first cosmonaut to fly on board the space shuttle. He flew on STS-60 in 1994. And then
he's chief of their space
and he became
right
chief of the Cosmonaut Corps. That's right. It went on, and STS-63 became the first American space shuttle to rendezvous with the Russian space station Mir. We didn't dock on that particular mission, but Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Titov was on board.
Eileen Collins was the pilot of that.
And Eileen was the pilot. That was her first mission. Yep. And she was the first woman to be a pilot astronaut on that, and of course went on to be a commander.
Beautiful picture there, the Mir space station.
Oh, it is. And then a month later, astronaut Norm Thagard was launched from Baikonur with two Russian cosmonauts on a Soyuz to Mir, and that's Thagard there in the foreground. And then the first American spacecraft to join or dock with the Russian space station was 20 years after the Apollo Soyuz mission. It was STS-71. And you see the space shuttle docked to Mir. And what that does is it gives you an idea of the relative size of the space shuttle versus the Russian space station.
That's an incredible shot, and just yeah, look how big the space shuttle is.
Yeah.
Just, what a machine it was.
And then on
Well,
that
like pointing
mission,
out too, this boom here
oh yeah,
is the attitude control,
that's right.
altitude control. They actually had rockets on that to raise the mirror periodically.
Yep. And then on that flight, the American commander, Robert Hoot Gibson, in the foreground in the red shirt, was shaking hands with the Mir 18 commander, Vladimir Jevrenkov. And it was the first time that two American and a Russian space vehicles docked since the Apollo Soyuz mission. But what Apollo Soyuz did is it opened the door for this cooperation that came in the years to come. And then between 1994 and 1998, there were 12 space shuttle missions that involved the space station Mir, and 7 astronauts who spent long-term stays aboard the space station Mir. And then in 1998, in December, the largest engineering project in human history began. The Russians launched their first module, the Zarya module, which was a functional cargo block of the space station. We launched a space shuttle with the Unity module, and this is the functional cargo block being pulled in to dock with our module. And again, a Russian and an American module being pulled together to start assembly of the International Space Station. Then there were some spacewalks to make electrical connections between the two vehicles. And then after that, the Russian astronaut on board, Sergei Krikalev, flying again with the Americans, is with the Space Shuttle commander, Bob Cabana, and they're getting ready to open the hatch between the Space Shuttle and the space station. And shortly after that, on December the 10th, they floated in together to open up the International Space Station.
That's literally turn the lights on. Good Bob
Yep.
Cabana there.
Yep.
I know you dealt with Bob maybe many times.
Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, he was center director here at Kennedy Space Center for a long time.
12 years.
I mean, we got to know him really well, and he served. He was the longest serving center director here when he
quite a
moved
guy.
to headquarters.
Very very accessible too. Wanted to mention these are the two segments where the leaks that you've been hearing on the International Space Station that delayed the Axiom 4 crew
Right.
launch. These are the segments that they're concerned about, and wonder why. They've been put together since 1999, up there. So got a little age on them. But both Bob and Krikalev got a little bit of gray hair now.
Oh
compared to
yeah,
that picture
they
there.
both do. And sort of close with this. This is a painting Alexei Leonov did before the Apollo Soyuz mission, again showing what an artist he is. And it's really a spectacular shot because he's such an outstanding artist. But I think it's appropriate that this painting that shows this is by one of the participants in that mission.
Awesome. We got some great comments there from some people, Bob Granath, that we've not heard from. Mike in the Mike Philippian says, I was in Moscow a few years ago, and through our guide, I met Anton Smoyatekov, son of the man who designed the docking mechanism.
Ah, okay.
All right. And then he also says he met one of the engineers. I want to have my voice going this way. Met one of the engineers who worked with Korolev at the time. It was a real honor to shake hands with one of the pioneers. Thank you, Mike, for joining Stay Curious. And Cliff Watson's in Pomona, Australia, rubbing the Sandman out of his eyes there as he's experiencing Friday morning. And Robin is old says back when a tracksuit was a high-performing piece of space clothing.
Right.
What they were wearing there in
Yeah,
their,
that's
the
it.
previous picture there. Yeah, good observation there. Yes, excellent program, Bob, as usual there. I'm looking to see if we have any other questions there. Robert Law mentions Rockwell was the prime contractor for the docking module. And Tommy Usiak says that the shuttle Mir, when it began, he was pleasantly surprised how we got along with our Russian hosts and escorts and how accommodating they were at Baikonur and Star City.
Well, I think that's one of the things that came out of this Apollo Soyuz mission. It opened the door to cooperation between our two nations. And of course, it's led to, for the last 25 years, Americans and Russians have been working side by side aboard the International Space Station.
I've got a question that somebody might answer or may not be able to answer. This might be a Gary Allgaier question, Marty. Why did they need this big this big engine bell and that powerful engine when they were not leaving Earth orbit? And that was a correcting, but most importantly, to stop them, slow them down to get in orbit for about what, a 20-minute burn or longer, and then to get them out of moon orbit.
That was the retro system for landing an Apollo spacecraft, even if it's in Earth orbit.
Okay.
That they would turn that around in the direction they were flying, and they would fire that service propulsion system engine to as a retrograde burn to land the Apollo. Of course, shortly after that firing, the command service module would separate, and then the command module with the astronauts aboard would then re-enter and land.
That said, my real question is, why couldn't they just use the RCSs or put a less? It doesn't seem like it seemed like that's overkill for the re-entry, but
Well,
maybe it's not.
it was simply a case of that's the way it was designed, and so they might as well use it that way. And so on the Earth orbit missions, Apollo 7, Apollo 9, and then of course they used the same engine for the re-entry burn on the 3 Skylab missions, along with Apollo Soyuz. So all of those Earth orbital missions with the command module simply used the same engine that they had designed for the trips to the moon.
Well explained for me there, Bob. Thank you so much. I see my daughter Jessie Q's watching. Hi, McKinley. Hi, Macy. Hope you're being a good girls for your mommy there. Depot MSA, that's a new one that we haven't seen before, Marty. And boy, I really learned a lot. Great story here. This is, hopefully it doesn't go under the radar too much this week. I'd like to see a special or two on the news feeds over the weekend to celebrate this.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, it's the same week as the Apollo 11 celebration that we'd never want to ignore about man's greatest adventure. But this, in many ways, is a great adventure for 2 superpowers.
Oh, yeah.
And we're still cooperating today. Okay, at this moment, 10 humans orbiting the Earth, 3 Chinese, we've got 1 Japanese, 3 Americans, and 3 Russians, I guess, are on the space station. That makes 7 on the space station, 3 on Tiangong. So, and 2 women, 2 American women up there with Johnny Kim, and he's up there with Sergei and Alexei on MS-27 mission, and Krill is the Russian that's with on the SpaceX 10 crew with Onishi, the Japanese up there to make 10. So I always like pointing that out, Bob, because we've got can't take it for granted how hard it is to orbit the Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And or more people would be up there right now.
That's right. It's difficult, and that's why it's such a great achievement. And of course, coming up on the 31st of this month, there'll be the Crew 11 launch going off from the Kennedy Space Center. We'll have 4 people on board, 2 Americans, a Russian cosmonaut, and a Japanese Space Agency astronaut going up
2
to
rookies.
relieve 4 that are up there now.
Exactly. So Marty waved the question or comment sign there.
This thing is asking, wasn't the cabin pressure of the 2 spacecrafts different?
That's correct. We had a little more pressure, and so one of the purposes of that docking module was to help equalize the pressure between the 2 spacecraft once they had docked. So once they docked, they had to equalize the pressure before they could open the hatch between the 2.
And Jim McDade mentioned what you said, that the service propulsion system was made for spec for the lunar missions, and of course it was left over from canceled, and they weren't going to change it since it worked. They probably didn't need as much fuel in the tank there
Right.
as they would on a lunar mission there. So appreciate y'all watching today. Why don't you say some hellos out there to friends watching you today, Bob?
Oh yeah, looks like we got quite a few names here. RG Jubilee, Dave Strange, Chris
Stangy.
Oh
He's
yeah,
our diamond watcher there.
gotcha. Chris Kelly.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah. Tom Usiak, Robert Law, Carlton Bailey.
Dean Babcock. Don't miss Dean there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Depot, MSA.
DPO Mesa, Mitch Ruthman, Steve Jokums, Jesse Q, Alina Atherhockey, Mark Usiak, Gary Gerald, Jim McDade, Doug Forrest, Cliff Watson, Mike Philippines, and Ruben.
Robin is old. Yeah. And,
Robin is old.
Probably Sharon Gonzalez is watching. Maybe Connie McDaniel. Maybe Hazel Banks watching today's wonderful program. You know what I really learned? I learned a lot. A couple things there. But a good trivia question is, who was the U.S. president during the Apollo Soyuz Test Project?
Yeah, that was Gerald Ford.
Yeah,
As you recall,
former vice president.
I'm trying to think if they had selected Nelson Rockefeller to serve as vice president by this point. I know he eventually became.
Rockefeller was the vice president under Ford. Yeah.
That's right.
And that's another great trivia question. Of course, Ford being ascended to the presidency at the resignation of President Richard Nixon, who was the architect of this, ironically.
Yeah, he
in
got the
many
ball
ways.
rolling.
So,
Yeah.
in there. Bob, wonderful, always as usual
right.
there. I keep looking at how well dressed he is and have to apologize. I was doing a kids' space camp today, and the deeper I got in the show, I'm going, I should have gone to wardrobe and gotten a little fancier, Bob.
Well,
You always look
it's
so
fun.
good.
It's fun dealing with children because they're very eager to learn about
Oh, yeah.
space. It's something they deal with all the time. There are many people alive today who have never lived in a time when there wasn't somebody in outer space.
I had a room full of those kids today at our STEAM camp. It's
Yep.
just amazing in there. So, Bob, I appreciate the efforts you put into this, and we'll figure out something for you to do in August. You're always welcome to come back, and
right.
and I'm glad to share with you again this lovely lady,
Yeah.
Joanne Morgan, who was had done her job in the Apollo 11 launch room, the only woman among 300 and some men in that room at the time. And now we've got Blackwell Thompson. What's her
Charlie
first
Blackwell
name? Charlie
Thompson.
Blackwell
Yeah,
Thompson is
the launch director.
The launch director now.
Yeah,
uh,
it's
on
a
there.
privilege
And,
to get to know some of these
And
people.
Joanne really broke a lot of barriers for
yeah.
people like Charlie Blackwell Thompson and on and on.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you, buddy. Tomorrow's a TGIF. We're gonna take a deep breath and look at some space history. Maybe catch up on some space news. Bob, you see something that you think our viewers should know about? Don't hesitate to let me know, because we got the
We'll do
best
that.
viewers on YouTube that love space history right from the horse's mouth, literally. One of the public affairs officers of 3 or 4 great American space companies. So thank you, Marty, for a great Streamlabs job there, and hope that you all want to tune in and check out our Peace in Earth Orbit celebration this Saturday here at the museum or on YouTube. Steve Agid doing a slideshow retrospective of ASTP, and Jay Honeycutt and John Tribe, 2 legends of NASA, talking about their involvement with this important mission 50 years ago. Why can't we get along on the ground when we can get along in Earth orbit, Bob? That's the age-old question. So thank you all for watching today. And remember, we're all Earthlings. We all live on a planet, and the only border that should matter is that thin blue line. Until next time, I'm Mark Marquette saying, Thank you for staying curious, and we'll see you again to bridge the space between us.